you hear all of these stories about, we were talking about, I was telling you what Tony was saying before about, he was on Charles Grodin, he was talking about, oh, the starlets, they all would sleep with these guys and they'd all get a $50 a week contract, and Marilyn became bitter.
I'm so bored with Tony and his Marilyn thing.
Really? But then you go, and there were a lot of girls I could tell you about that were even prettier that had contracts. Now, in that world of contract players, because what did you get? You got $50 a week, and they had you for 7 years, but they could renew. They could dump you after 3 months.
That's right.
And you know, everybody knows all the horror stories about Marilyn and how you had to sleep with this guy and that. Do you think that Janet Leigh was somehow just kind of a lucky exception to that rule, that somehow she could bypass that, or do you think she just didn't need it that much and wouldn't have done it anyway?
I don't think that Janet ever... See, Janet started out as somebody else's discovery, and she wasn't treated like that, given the typical starlet treatment, because she started as a star in her own right, and people respected her, and she was a nice girl, and people knew it, and people didn't treat her like one of the broads around the studio. They treated her like the kind of star, the important leading lady that she was. Janet, for instance, she would do... She never was a great ballerina, but she learned to dance beautifully. You had mentioned 2 Tickets to Broadway. She danced in that. She danced in P. Kelly's Blues, a whole different kind of dancing. In My Sister Eileen, she danced with Bobby Fosse, and you can't do much better than that. And she danced, and she was a lovely dancer. Bye Bye Birdie, one of the highlights of the movie, is Janet's dance with all the Shriners. And she never was a dancer as a kid. She wasn't a dancer till she had to be in the movies. But she was very adaptable, and she could learn to do what she had to do.
So would you say that, can you talk about that little story that she shares in the book about how Howard Hughes said to you, if the occasion presents itself, you might propose to her in my behalf? How did that all work? Like her?
Never happened.
Well,
Not to me.
supposedly in her book, she talks about how Howard Hughes, I thought you were the person, would say to certain people who worked for him, because he was evidently too shy to actually approach her. But he
approached her.
On her.
He sure did.
But she was completely outraged at that. I mean, how would...
Well, Howard Hughes knew a pretty girl when he saw one, and he had known a lot of them and knew a lot more afterward. And obviously Janet was the prettiest girl around. That's why he spent an unprecedented amount of money to borrow her from MGM for a couple of movies. It was his hope and desire, I suppose, that he'd make it with her, but she had no intention of anything like that happening, and Howard wasn't used to being turned down by the ladies of his desire, but he sure was turned down by Janet.
Do you think that time caused a kind of drag on her career? Because that movie went on, and the loan out to Howard Hughes. Do you think that it broke her momentum a bit at MGM?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, Jet Pilot it was a terrible movie. Joseph von Sternberg was trying to make Janet into a Dietrich, and Janet was her own thing. She wasn't Dietrich. And John Wayne wasn't the most scintillating leading man a girl ever had. But, and 2 Tickets to Broadway was neither one of her RKO pictures was very good, but I don't think that they stopped. They were before pictures like Manchurian Candidate and Touch of Evil and Pete Kelly's Blues.
Do you happen to know from, your vast knowledge of how Hollywood worked in those days, whether the loan out was really money motivated by Mayer to use, or do you think it was just kind of like two guys where you said, look, you gotta let me have her, or do you know anything about how that worked in those
I have
days?
no idea.
Okay. I may be able to find somebody else, because I'm curious as to whether
Hughes said, I want to borrow this girl. She's a hot young actress. And Mayer said, if you want to borrow this hot young actress, you got to pay through the nose for her because she is a hot young actress. So, RKO, Hughes, through RKO, paid a good chunk of money to Louis V. Mayer at MGM to borrow their hot young actress.
In the years that she was married to Tony and had her children, she would always take her children with her. They were very well known for all
Always. Yes, she was.
When her marriage ended to Tony Curtis, it seems as though everything went so much her way for about 10 years, and then a lot of tragedy came into her life when her father committed suicide. In those days, were you involved with her in trying to handle a press spin on that kind of thing? I mean, did you help her out in those years?
As much as you could, but there wasn't, it was an unhappy situation with her father. It was I don't think it was overplayed. It was obviously played in the press, but they didn't dwell on it that I'm aware of. It was a tough time for Janet, and it was a tough situation. She adored her father. But
did you know her father?
I just met him slightly.
And then
her mother too.
And then later on when she collapsed in New York, and it was reported in the paper that she had taken sleeping pills. You remember that?
No, I do not remember that.
Yeah, it was reported in the paper. It was right after her separation from Tony, and shortly after her father died. She was in New York, and she collapsed and woke up in the hospital, and it was reported that she had tried to commit suicide. Tony says in his book that she tried to commit suicide. She says that she had been drinking and took some sleeping pills and fell, and that she woke up in the hospital.
I have no.
You didn't have to handle that for
I
her
didn't.
or the press
no,
on that
no,
or anything
no.
like that. How about the divorce? Did you have to handle that for her in terms of how the press got that information? Because she talks in her book about how she came to New York because she had given out some stories about the Happy Curtises, and then she came back to talk to.
Well, at that time, I wasn't officially representing Janet. I was with 20th Century Fox. I had left RKO to go to 20th Century Fox in the same capacity.
I see.
So
you weren't.
I was not, and I was.
Okay, I was not clear on that.
Yeah.
At 20th Century Fox, were you involved with her on any films?
I don't remember that she did any films for Fox that I was involved in.
Right.
No, I wasn't.
Right. You know her two daughters, right? You know both her daughters?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you think they growing up, how do you think they reacted to their mother? Do you think they knew that their mother was a movie star?
How could they not? Of course, from the time they were little kids, Janie and Kelly were always very well-known little kids. And they grew up in that feeling, and they were happy, well-adjusted kids, to the best of my knowledge. I know there was a point where they did their own thing, but and then Jamie, who was living with Janet in L.A. and knew everybody at Universal, MCA, and signed a little contract playing a little part in a TV series. But that's all beside the point. I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah. But did you ever get the feeling that they were at all competitive with their mother?
I never did. No, I mean, they I know, I don't see much of Jamie anymore, but Kelly I see, and Kelly is a joy. Unfortunately, Kelly didn't get the start that Jamie did because she wasn't around to take it. But Kelly is as bright and hip and pretty and all those things as Jamie is. And if Kelly had gone the same route that Jamie did, I think she'd be as important a star as Jamie is.